Welcome to the City. I'm Anthony Wilson, the Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo. And joining us today is our brand spanking new Emergency Management Coordinator, Steve Miles. Steve, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, for people who don't know you, and you've been a member of our community for quite a long time, I'd like you to sort of introduce yourself, tell folks what you'd like them to know about you and your credentials.
I spent 40 years in law enforcement, not only here in San Angelo, but across the state, several different areas. I have spent during that 40-year time. I also was a volunteer firefighter and am still an active volunteer firefighter. But then I also got involved in emergency management as it relates to law enforcement and the community about 17 years ago. And I found I was very, very interested in that. It made a lot of sense. I became very involved in it. And so as a result of all of that, and as a result of my growth in emergency management, I now serve on several state working groups, several state boards and advisory committees with Texas Division of Emergency Management. And when the Emergency Management Coordinator came open for the City of San Angelo, I decided, it's time to close a chapter on law enforcement, bring the skills and expertise that I've learned over the years in emergency management, in law enforcement, also in firefighting, to the table to be able to serve the citizens of San Angelo and Tom Green County even more.
When you talk about emergency management, of course, you lead the Emergency Management Office. What does that office do, and what are its responsibilities?
In a nutshell, our responsibilities are to see to it that the City of San Angelo and Tom Green County are disaster resilient communities. So our job is to educate the public, educate the city staff, educate the mayor, the city manager, and the county judge, and to bring all of these people, as well as private sector and non-governmental organizations together, so that when we do have a disaster here, everybody is singing on the same page, we're working off the same script, and we can best serve the citizens of our communities.
So when you talk about emergencies and you talk about disasters, what are some examples of maybe typical emergencies and disasters that you try to have our local folks prepared for?
Well, the typical ones, and we've just gone through some, are the winter weather situations. Those are emergencies. They can turn into disasters. So we have to keep everybody informed on that. In the springtime, we have the storm issues. We don't have to have a tornado here to have a disaster. Just think back to May of '95. That was not a tornado. Straight line winds can be just as devastating as tornadoes, but then when you add the hail on top of it, you have a disaster.
What are some examples of some things that people may not necessarily consider to be disasters, but are things that your office and law enforcement and first responders would actually respond to?
A lot of people don't think beyond the actual event itself. But let's say and I would like to see this, but just as an example, let's say we have a flood here. There's going to be certain parts of the town that are going to be inundated. We're going to have to evacuate those people. How do we evacuate them in an orderly fashion? Where do we take them? How do we put them up? How do we house them until they can get back to their homes or until they can find suitable housing? These are all issues that we have to plan for, we have to exercise, and then we have to rewrite our plans once we find the weaknesses in them.
When you talk about your plans, how much of your time is devoted to crafting plans to respond to different sorts of emergencies?
On the crafting of the plans, we spend probably at least half of our time. We have the main plan, but then there are 21 annexes. And to simplify that, our emergency management plan is 4.5 inches thick. It is a book. So if you think of it in terms of a normal book, our basic plan is chapter 1. The 21 annexes are additional chapters to that. The basic plan is the umbrella. And then those 21 chapters are what we do in very specific instances to support the basic plan, how we respond to that particular need.
And what do those plans generally consist of? I mean, what sort of things are incorporated within the plan?
What is incorporated in them is specifically, and let's go back to the evacuation scenario. Who does the actual evacuation? Who takes the vehicles in? Who's charged with supplying those vehicles? And then where do we take the people? Who takes care of the housing? Who takes care of the feeding? How do they do that? In those annexes, we get very specific per issue on who does what, how they do it, and then how it's reported, and then how the chain of command is in that. We can't just run around out there having everybody doing their own thing. We have to follow a specific chain of command with very clear reporting authorities in there.
And with these plans, there's actually a national template that is followed so that different agencies, regardless of whether they're state, local, or federal, are actually working off the same plan, correct?
That is exactly right. We actually have two national plans that impact us here at a local level. The first and most important one is the National Incident Management System. That was established in 2003, and in order for people to receive federal funding, they had to adopt the National Incident Management System as their template for operations during emergencies and disasters, and that adoption had to be by September of 2005. In that, it lays out that template. The second part is the National Response Framework, and that shows how the federal assets will be delivered to the local level in the event of a national disaster.
Now, once you have the plans, obviously you have to train personnel about how to respond to those plans and how to activate those plans. How much of your time is devoted to training?
I prefer, rather than saying training, I prefer to put that all under a large heading of education, because education also involves training. Part of our job, a major part of our job, is educating the community. And when we go out and we do presentations, we are actually educating and training the community how to deal with that particular aspect of emergency response that they're asking about. But then the other part of the training is that we have to train city staff, volunteers, volunteer organizations, anybody that's going to be involved in the disaster response. We have to train them as to what they need to be doing at their level of response. But then we as the staff have to also receive training. And emergency response and emergency management is very fluid. It's not something that is set in stone. The National Response Framework had major changes to it after Hurricane Sandy. And so every time there's a major disaster, something's going to change in the plan, and we, as the people in the Office of Emergency Management, have to stay current with that.
When you talk about educating, obviously you're talking about educating the public and the citizenry along with the people who will be responding to the emergency. What's the best advice that you can give people on how to be prepared for any sort of emergency?
The best thing they can do is, first of all, start with their family and the individuals. Be sure their own home and their own family is safe and that they are prepared to deal with the disaster. And once they've done that, then I would strongly encourage them to get involved with community organizations such as the Red Cross, the Community Emergency Response Team. Those places are going to reinforce what they're going to do at home. They also then will be putting out that same message to the public.
Are there certain supplies and staples that everyone should have on hand in case there is some sort of an emergency?
There is, and let me just, we have a brochure here that is put out by FEMA. So Preparing Makes Sense, Get Ready Now. It has that list in there, and let me just quickly read that list off. You should have 1 gallon of water per person per day for drinking and sanitation. You should have at least a 3-day supply of non-perishable food. You need to have a battery-powered radio and extra batteries, a flashlight and extra batteries, a first aid kit, a whistle to signal for help, a filter mask or cotton t-shirt to help filter the air, moist towelettes for sanitation, wrench or pliers to turn off utilities, a manual can opener for food, plastic sheet and duct tape so that when you have to shelter in place you can do that, garbage bags and plastic ties for personal sanitation, and then any unique family needs such as daily prescription medications, infant formula, diapers, and other important family documents. That's the basics of that kit.
You mentioned earlier in this interview about weather-related events. When we have one of those sort of events here in San Angelo, what are you doing to advise people about how they should respond and what the dangers are?
My job actually starts days before the event actually gets here. I watch very closely the weather patterns. I'm in constant contact with the National Weather Service, and the closer we get to D-Day of that event, the more information I am able to give to our city leaders. I start getting that information to the mayor, the city manager, the county judge, and then to you as it develops, so that you can start getting that information out to the public. Once that event hits, then I continue doing that, but then I also use the Nixle plan notification to instantaneously update the citizens who are subscribed to that. The Weather Service also, through the weather notification, puts out their information at the same time also.
So there are a lot of different avenues. I mean, obviously the city's website at COSA-TX, our Facebook and Twitter pages, Nixle.com, the Emergency Management Office has an account with them that people can sign up to get alerts. Right. And obviously our mass media works very well with us in getting that information out as well.
The media is critical in this, and that's one of the things that we in the Office of Emergency Management constantly strive for, is to build that good working relationship with the media, because they are critically important on getting the proper information out to the public.
We just have a few seconds left. If people want more information, they can obviously go to cosatx.us/emergency management. What are some other places that they can get some more information?
Well, they can also call us at the Office of Emergency Management, and that number is 657-4230. We'll give them all the information that we can. We also want to get out to them in the community to get the information out. They can also contact the American Red Cross at 658-4409. They also have the information that they will be glad to give to you, and any other information you want. And then the Community Emergency Response Team is headed up, and it's headed through the Concho Valley Council of Governments, and they can contact B. Ramsey out there at the COG, and that number is 944-9666.
We've been talking with Steve Mild. He's our Emergency Management Coordinator. And when we return, we'll be discussing the upcoming election with City Clerk Alicia Ramirez. But first, we're going to spotlight another outstanding city employee, 911 Coordinator Maxine Hamilton.
Maxine Hamilton. I'm the 911 addressing coordinator. I've been with the city for 20.5 years. Anything to do with an address, they come to me, whether it's a new address change, post office calls me. Everyone calls if it pertains to an address, if there's an issue, if I have to, they want to change their address, or they have the wrong address. It's just anything to do with an address. It all ties in together, especially any of the erroneous addressing problems. They call me and they need to be corrected, because obviously you want the emergency response to go to the correct address, and that's very, very important. So I work closely with the dispatch office, and which is public safety. I like interacting with people and helping, and just trying to make a difference, trying to help people. Readdressing, people don't like change, especially if they've had an address for 50 years and they get a phone call from me or a letter from me, and I try my best to make it as painless as possible, but most people don't like to change their address. You have to be very careful when you choose new streets. You don't want duplications. That can create issues for public safety. You don't want sound-alike names, and if you've already got 15 river drives, you don't want another anything. You want to stay away from that kind of stuff if you can. And there's been a few challenges with some of the street names, but normally people are willing to work with you. Being able to accomplish something good and everybody's happy with it. It's a neat place to work. I've always worked part-time, so that makes it unique. and just helping the public. It just makes you feel good when you help people, and you know, they walk away happy. I knew nothing about addressing when I took this job. I knew how to read a map, and that was it. So I've come a long ways. I've learned a lot. The moves have helped me. It's educated me, but I didn't know a thing about the process. The technology is amazing. I had nothing but, you see paper maps hanging there? That's what I worked with. So, oh yes, come a long ways. Believe it or not, I still have to refer to those occasionally, especially when your computer goes down and you're up the creek, you go to the maps. Grandkids, kids, church, gardening, I have dogs, and I like to cook. I try to dabble in gumbo and things like that. That's basically my heritage from Louisiana. So I've lived here all my life. I was not born here. I was born in Louisiana. My parents moved back to San Angelo when I was 9 months old, but I still claim my Cajun heritage. So, but you know, I'm kind of more a Texan, I guess, than the other. But good day at work when I can get everything done and the phone doesn't ring too much, not too many interruptions, and you know, you can get a full half a day in. That's a good day.
Welcome back to the city. We are joined now by our city clerk, Alicia Ramirez. She is here to talk about the May 10th City Council election. Alicia, thank you for being with us.
Well, it's a pleasure, Anthony.
Now tell us what the city clerk's role is as far as city elections go.
My main role is to make sure that the candidates receive their, whenever they come in, they obtain their forms from my office. They submit them to my office. I check to make sure everything's correct. I also am responsible for posting all the notices for the election, as well as providing any other information that a candidate or interested individual citizens would like on the elections.
So you are our chief election officer.
Basically, yes. However, the city does contract with the county. They actually conduct the election for us. However, I oversee the process, and I work very closely with our elections administrator.
And how often are city elections held?
They're held once a year because our uniform election day is in May. However, council may authorize a special election. We could have one in November.
And the May elections are typically to fill our council seats, correct?
Correct. However, as you said, typically, sometimes we may have a special election for, like, for instance, the sales tax election, or we may have an unexpired seat that we would have to hold a special election to fill that seat.
So as I mentioned, our next election is May the 10th. Give us the basics of that election. What and who's going to be on the ballot?
For this election, we have 3 single-member district seats up, 1, 3, and 5.
So tell us who the candidates are in single-member District 1.
Right now, it's Rodney Fleming, Trinidad Aguirre, and Bill Richardson.
And then in single-member District 3, we have
Johnny Silvas, Richard Bastardo, and Eugene Garcia.
And then lastly, in District 5, we have 2 candidates.
Yes, Philip Skinner and Elizabeth Krinestaff.
And they'll be running, how long will the term be that they'll be running to serve?
They'll be actually running a 2-year term. It's a full term from May 2014 to May of 2016.
And as someone comes to your office and they're considering running for the city council, what are the basic criteria that they have to meet in order to qualify as a city council candidate?
Of course, they have to be a qualified voter. So that means that they have to be at least 18 years old, be a U.S. citizen, be a resident at least 12 months of the city, and if it's a specific single-member district like it is in these races, they have to live within the district for 6 months.
Now, obviously, with 3 seats up and 8 candidates, we're anticipating that there's going to be a lot of interest in this election. How do people go about finding out if they're eligible to vote in this particular election?
Of course, you know, they can access the city's website. It's in our charter. They can call my office. I will gladly review the qualifications with them.
And how do they find out if they live in one of the 3 districts? Because if they don't live in one of those 3 districts, they're not actually eligible to vote in this election, correct?
Once again, they can call our office. We'll verify based on their address. Whenever let's say, for instance, they wanted to fill the application for candidacy, they complete an affidavit telling us that they've lived within that district for those 6 months. However, of course, this doesn't apply to the mayor's race because the mayor can live anywhere within the city. But as long as they've lived in the city for 12 months, they would be qualified.
And on our website at cosatx.us/elections, there's a map of all the single member districts, so voters can go and see if they live in districts 1, 3, or 5, and thus be eligible to vote in this election.
Correct. And also we have a street index. So if they don't want to look at the map, they can look at the index, type in their street address, and then look at it that way as well.
Now, how do citizens who live in one of the 3 districts, 1, 3, or 5, how do they go about getting registered to vote in this election?
It goes back to saying that you're a qualified voter. In other words, you have to be 18 years of age, be a U.S. citizen, have not been finally convicted of a felony, and live within the county of that specific county.
And where can they go to get registered to vote?
There have several options. Of course, we have the Tom Green County Elections Office. We have the Secretary of State. They can request an application from the Secretary of State's office, or whenever they renew their driver's license, they can request a renewal at that time as well.
So with the Tom Green County Elections Office, tell us where that is, and generally when are they open?
They're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. They are also open during the noon hour. They're located at 113 West Beauregard in the Ed B. Keys building on the 2nd floor.
Is there any online registration for voters to be able to register to vote?
Yes, there is. They can actually go to the county's website as well as Secretary of State and download an application.
But once they fill out that application, then do they have to take that personally back to, let's say, the elections office?
They can take it directly, or they can mail it.
What's the deadline for someone to register to vote, to be eligible to vote in the May 10th City Council election?
And it's always 30 days before the election day, so it would be April 10th, which is a Thursday.
Now, when will the early voting occur?
Early voting will begin April 28th, which is a Monday, through May 7th. However, from April 28th to May 2nd, it's from 8 to 5, and then the following Monday, which is the 5th and the 6th of May, it's from 7 to 7.
And how many early voting locations will there be in this election?
We have 5 early voting locations, and within those 5 early voting locations, it doesn't matter where you live, you may vote at any one of these 5 locations. And the main one is at the county, which is at the 2nd floor of the Ed B. Keys building, the elections office. But again, it doesn't matter where you live within the city, you can vote at any one of these 5 locations.
And those locations can also be found on our website.
Correct.
At cosatx.us/elections.
Yeah, you're right.
Now, on election day, how do voters determine where it is that they should go to vote on May the 10th?
Okay, and this is where voter education comes into place. Each voter will get a voter registration card. That precinct is listed on their card. We have various outlets that will have the information posted, whether it's the city's website, the county's website. We also put it in the newspaper as well as the Conexión paper. So, or they can call our offices, whether it's a county or my office. We will provide that information for them.
And so they need to search out where they're going to vote and find out where it is. And it may not be the same place that they voted, let's say, in the March primary election that we just had.
Correct. You're very correct, because it's very important to look at your card, because it's going to differentiate between county and city elections and even school elections. But for the most part, we do combine precincts with the school, which they're not having an election this year. But that's why, again, voter education, make sure you find out beforehand where your precinct is, where you live, and then call either our office or the elections office, and we'll be gladly to give that information.
Now, why are there sometimes different polling locations between, let's say, a city election and a county election like we just had?
The political parties, it depends on how they want to have the setup as far as the polling locations. We as the city have worked really closely with the county and the school districts, where we work together to try to have the same polling locations every year. However, there's some years that maybe a facility is not able to house us for that. They may have an event or may be under construction. We just never know, but we always like to secure the same locations every year.
And is the cost a factor? I mean, do you try to consolidate some of the polling places in order to lower the cost to the taxpayers?
Yes, the cost is definitely a factor. So that's why we used to have more polling locations. We have combined down to 8 locations on election day. So it does make a difference when you have a lot compared to what we have now.
How much does the typical election cost the city and its taxpayers?
It can range, because depending on the type of election, like for instance, this election is only holding for 3 single member district offices versus an entire citywide election. So it can range anywhere between 30 to 40,000. Our costs have decreased within the last couple of years, but it is still expensive.
Now I'm curious, why have the cost decreased?
Because of the number of the polling locations.
Gotcha.
Where before we had, almost 20, now we have 8. So it has made a significant difference for us.
Now when people go to the polling places, whether it's early voting or whether it's on May 10th on Election Day, is there anything that they need to bring with them? Do they need to bring their voter registration card or any form of identification?
That is one of the main changes. Now a person has to bring a photo ID, and there are 7 approved types of photo ID. It can be either your Texas license or your Texas ID, or any government-issued ID with a photo on it.
Now, voter turnout, unfortunately, in city elections has typically been lower than it is, let's say, in a presidential election or a gubernatorial election. And I know that you and I are sort of like minds when it comes to this. Why do you think it's important that people educate themselves about the city election and then participate in it?
Well, the main thing is the government, our local government has a bigger impact on their daily lives. So once again, voter education, I know, bigger turnout for presidential, but when you think about it, your local government has a bigger impact on your life.
That's because they're setting your property tax rates,
right,
and they're spending your tax dollars in very specific ways that affect the community that we live in.
Correct, as well as ordinances that people have to follow, permits that are required, that code compliance. There's just certain things that in our everyday lives that it affects.
What are some of the issues that you think that that will typically bring people to the polls? Mayor's
race is usually a larger turnout. It could be a sales tax. If we have a special election for a sales tax election, a huge one that we have was a smoking initiative. So that brought out a lot of voters.
So if people have questions about the election, and I know there's a myriad of them regarding where they can vote and whether they're eligible to vote and where they can register, if they have those sort of questions, where can they go for answers?
They can contact my office, 657-4405, or they can email the questions at Alicia Ramirez at cosatx.us, or look on our website. We try to have information out there. I understand sometimes people want to have that face-to-face or just the phone call. That's no problem for us. Just give us a call, contact us.
And then on election night, if people want to see the results as they're rolling in, where are some places that they can go to find that?
I stay very close in connection with our Public Information Officer, your office, and we post those on our website, on Twitter, on Facebook, as well as the Tom Green County's website.
We've been talking with our City Clerk, Alicia Ramirez, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of The City.